Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Economics channel. Tonight, we are going to follow a single, quiet thread, one spun from silk, salt, silver, and trust, that once stretched across the whole width of the ancient world. We call it the Silk Road, though it was never really one road at all, but thousands of paths, rivers, and mountain passes, all tied together by merchants who believed a stranger's word could be as good as gold. For thousands of years, this thread carried more than goods. It carried ideas, religions, inventions, and a very old, very human question. How do you trust someone you will never see again? Long before banks, before paper money, before any single nation controlled trade from one end of a continent to another, ordinary people built systems of credit, coinage, and cooperation that let a bolt of cloth woven in China end up wrapped around the shoulders of a senator in Rome. Tonight we will walk slowly through that story, through deserts and mountain passes, through the rise and fall of great trading cities, through fortunes made and fortunes lost, not to analyze markets, but simply to rest inside history, the way a river rests inside its banks. If you find these stories soothing, consider letting the channel know with a like, or leaving a quiet word in the comments. It helps more than you might think, and costs you nothing but a moment. For now, there is nothing you need to do. Let your shoulders soften into whatever is holding you. Let your jaw loosen, your breathing slow, your thoughts drift like caravans crossing an old, wide horizon. There is nowhere else you need to be tonight. Let's begin. A restless emperor once sent a single envoy west to find allies against a common enemy, and instead he found an entire world of trade waiting to be noticed. In the 2nd century BCE, Emperor Wu of Han China dispatched a court official named Zhang Qian into the unmapped lands beyond his western frontier, hoping only for a military alliance against nomadic raiders. He was captured, held for years, and finally released. Yet he returned not with soldiers but with reports of horses, grapes, and kingdoms that had never heard of China at all. Zhang Qian's mission failed in its original purpose, and he spent a decade as a prisoner far from home before ever completing it. Still, out of that long delay came something no army could have delivered, a map of possibility stretching from the Yellow River Basin toward Persia and beyond. In this sense, the network we now call the Silk Road did not begin with silk merchants at all, but with a diplomat's failed errand. It is a strange twist of history that the very name Silk Road was invented by someone who never traded a single bolt of cloth upon it. The German geographer Ferdinand von Richthofen coined the term Seidenstrasse, or Silk Road, only in the 19th century, long after the network itself had faded from its ancient peak. Before that, no single traveler ever called it by one name, because it was never truly one road at all, but a shifting web of trails, river crossings, and mountain passes used by countless different peoples. Merchants rarely traveled the entire distance themselves. Instead, goods passed hand to hand, cart to camel, town to town, changing owners dozens of times before reaching their final destination. Yet over the centuries, that patchwork network moved silk, spices, ideas, and metals across 2 full continents. This is what makes it so quietly remarkable, a road that never existed as a single path, yet still connected nearly the entire known world. Long before silk crossed any border, it had already crossed a boundary of trust inside China itself, becoming something closer to money than to mere cloth. Han Dynasty officials paid soldiers stationed at the frontier in bolts of silk rather than coin, because silk held its value across distance in a way that heavy bronze coins never could. A soldier posted 1,000 miles from the capital could carry a season's wages rolled into a single bundle, light enough to fold into a saddlebag. Tax collectors, too, accepted silk in place of grain or metal, especially in regions where coinage was scarce or unreliable. Over time, silk became a kind of second currency, quietly circulating beside official coins whenever the state's monetary system faltered. Yet this convenience came with a cost. An emperor who wished to fund an army simply had to command more silk woven, and the value of every bolt already in circulation grew a little thinner. Even in the earliest centuries of trade, the temptation to print wealth from nothing was already present. Only the ink was thread instead of paper. Imagine standing at the edge of the Han capital, Chang'an, watching a caravan assemble before dawn. Camels groaning under half-loaded packs, while merchants argue softly over the weight of silk bales. This was the true starting point of countless journeys west. Not a single dramatic departure, but hundreds of small, unglamorous mornings just like this one, repeated for centuries. Officials inspected goods for tax purposes, translators haggled over unfamiliar dialects, and guides who knew the desert wells were paid a premium no gold could easily replace. A single misjudged water stop could ruin an entire venture, so knowledge of the land was itself a form of wealth, traded and guarded as carefully as any bolt of silk. Every caravan that left those gates carried with it the accumulated memory of every caravan that had gone before, passed down through guides, drivers, and the quiet gossip of the road. It is easy to imagine the Silk Road as a line on a modern map, yet it was really a living memory, rebuilt fresh with every single departure. The horses of Central Asia were, in their own way, as valuable to China as silk was to the West, and this single exchange reshaped an empire's entire military economy.
Han China desperately needed larger, stronger horses to counter mounted nomadic raiders along its northern frontier, and it found them in the valleys of Fergana, far to the west. Chinese envoys described these animals as sweating blood from tiny wounds near their shoulders, a detail likely born of parasites rather than magic, yet it made the horses legendary before they ever arrived.
To obtain them, China offered enormous quantities of silk, sometimes provoking tension or outright conflict when local rulers refused to trade on Han terms. This is why so much of the earliest Silk Road exchange was never peaceful commerce alone, but a careful, sometimes forceful negotiation between empires who each held something the other desperately wanted. Even in its opening chapters, this river of trade was never simple generosity. It was need meeting need, across a landscape neither side fully controlled. What began as a narrow trail for envoys and horse traders slowly widened, over generations, into something closer to an economic circulatory system for half the known world. By the 1st century BCE, merchants from the Parthian Empire in Persia had positioned themselves as essential middlemen, controlling the routes between Han China and the Roman world, and quietly profiting from every transaction that passed through their territory. Rome, for its part, developed an appetite for Chinese silk so strong that Roman senators occasionally complained about silver draining out of the empire to pay for it. Pliny the Elder himself grumbled that Rome's love of Eastern luxury was bleeding the treasury dry, though his complaints did little to slow demand. Still, over time, this friction of complaint and desire is exactly what deepened the network further, because wherever profit persisted, new routes and new intermediaries eventually followed. In this way, an entire trade system grew not from a single grand plan, but from thousands of small, self-interested decisions, each one adding another thread to the same slow-growing fabric. Not every early exchange along these routes involved silk or horses at all. Sometimes it was simply knowledge that crossed the greatest distance of all.
Chinese metallurgical techniques, paper-making methods, and irrigation designs drifted slowly westward alongside merchant caravans, absorbed by curious travelers who carried the ideas home in memory rather than in cargo. Likewise, glass-making secrets from the Roman and Persian world drifted eastward, eventually reaching Chinese workshops that had never before produced glass of comparable clarity.
These exchanges rarely happened all at once. Instead, they crept forward one craftsman, one apprentice, one curious merchant at a time, over the span of decades rather than seasons. Even a single technique, once it crossed a border, could quietly reshape an entire regional economy within a generation. This is why the true wealth carried along these routes was never only the visible cargo on a camel's back, but the invisible knowledge riding along beside it, worth far more than its weight allowed anyone to measure. By the time the Han Dynasty's western trade routes had matured into a recognizable network, an entirely new kind of economic actor had emerged: the professional long-distance merchant, loyal to no single empire but useful to every one of them. These merchants built their fortunes not on land or armies, but on information, knowing which oasis had fresh water this season, which mountain pass had opened early, which regional ruler demanded which particular bribe. Over time, entire merchant families specialized in specific stretches of the route, handing routes and contacts down from father to son, the way a farmer might hand down a field. Trust between these families, built slowly across generations, became more valuable than any single shipment of goods, because a reputation for honesty was the only insurance available in a world with no enforceable international law. Still, one dishonest trader could poison an entire family's reputation for a generation, and reputations, once broken along these routes, were almost impossible to fully repair. In a world without banks, courts, or contracts as we now understand them, trust itself had quietly become the most valuable commodity of all. A Chinese emperor once sent a single envoy west, hoping only for allies. In the 2nd century BCE, Emperor Wu of Han dispatched a court official named Zhang Qian to find distant tribes who might help fight a common enemy on the steppe. He was captured almost immediately, held for years by a rival people, and only much later managed to continue his journey into unfamiliar kingdoms far to the west. He never found the military allies he was sent for, and by any narrow measure his mission failed. Yet what he brought home instead, reports of horses, grapes, and kingdoms that traded in ways China had never imagined, quietly opened a door that would stay open for the next 15 centuries. So often, it is the failed errand that changes the world, not the successful one. Silk itself began as one of history's most closely guarded secrets. For centuries, the technique of coaxing thread from the cocoons of silkworms was known only within China, protected by law and by distance, its export punishable, and its method a mystery to outsiders. Foreign buyers paid extraordinary sums for the finished cloth without ever learning how it was made, and for a long time, no one outside a few walled workshops truly understood the answer.
A monopoly like that is a fragile thing, resting on nothing but the world's patience not to ask too many questions.
Eventually, as with most secrets protected only by distance, it slipped quietly out into the wider world. Imagine a caravan gathering at dawn on the edge of a Chinese frontier town. Camels loaded with silk bales wrapped tightly against dust and damp. Merchants check ropes, recount coins, and murmur prayers to gods of safe travel before the long light of morning stretches out across the plain. Ahead of them lie mountains, deserts, and months of uncertain road, with no guarantee that any single bale will reach a buyer at all.
They go anyway, because the profit waiting at the far end is worth more than the fear of the journey.
This willingness to risk everything on a road with no fixed destination is, in its own quiet way, the oldest form of economic courage. Long before anyone called it the Silk Road, the road did not begin or end anywhere in particular. It grew instead as a patchwork of shorter regional routes, each connecting one oasis town to the next, one mountain pass to the next, long before any single traveler crossed the whole distance at once. A trader from Xi'an rarely saw Rome, and a merchant in Antioch rarely saw China. Instead, goods passed hand to hand, city to city, marked up a little at every stop along the way. No single person ever controlled the entire route, and no single empire ever fully owned it either. It worked precisely because it belonged to no one, and so, in a strange way, it belonged to everyone who used it. The steppe nomads who lived along these paths are often remembered only as raiders, yet they were something else as well.
Mounted peoples such as the Xiongnu could and did threaten caravans, demanding tribute or simply taking what they wanted by force when trade routes crossed their territory.
But those same peoples also traded horses, furs, and knowledge of the terrain that no settled merchant could offer, becoming essential partners as often as they were feared obstacles. A caravan that paid the right toll to the right chieftain might travel more safely than one that tried to avoid every steppe encampment. Fear and cooperation, it turns out, have always traveled the same roads together. Chinese silk reached the Mediterranean so gradually that, for a long time, the Romans who wore it had no clear idea where it came from. Some believed it grew on trees in a distant land. Others imagined it was combed, like wool, from strange, silk-bearing sheep. The truth, thread spun by careful hands from the cocoons of a small moth, would have seemed almost too plain and patient an answer for so luxurious a fabric. Distance does strange things to knowledge. The farther a good travels, the more mythical its origin becomes. Even now, so much of what reaches us feels like magic simply because we never see the hands that made it. Roman senators debated banning silk imports altogether, worried that Roman gold was draining steadily eastward to pay for it.
Writers of the time complained that a fortune in coin left the empire every year in exchange for a fabric that, in their eyes, produced nothing of lasting value in return. Sumptuary laws were proposed and occasionally passed, trying to limit who could wear silk and how much of it, though enforcement rarely matched ambition. People wanted the fabric far more than they wanted to obey the law protecting them from wanting it. Desire, across every century we will visit tonight, has a way of quietly outvoting good economic sense. This is what makes the earliest chapters of the Silk Road so quietly remarkable. No government designed this network, and no single treaty created it. It emerged instead from thousands of small, local decisions. A farmer selling surplus wool, a merchant risking one more crossing, a court official sent west for reasons that had nothing to do with trade at all. Out of all these separate, modest choices, something far larger slowly took shape, without anyone alive at the time fully realizing what they were building. Perhaps that is the truest pattern behind most great economic systems. Not a single grand design, but countless small hands, reaching quietly toward each other across a very long distance. A single Roman coin, dropped near a Chinese trading post, once puzzled archaeologists for decades. Gold and silver coins minted in the Mediterranean have been found scattered along Silk Road settlements thousands of miles from where they were struck.
evidence that currency itself traveled almost as freely as silk. Merchants did not always convert coins into local money right away. Sometimes a foreign coin's metal content alone was enough to make it welcome anywhere. Trust in gold, it turns out, crossed borders far more easily than trust in any single ruler's face stamped upon it. Bronze coins strung on cords formed the everyday money of much of Han China, each coin pierced with a small square hole at its center. Merchants along the eastern stretches of the road carried these strings of coins the way we might carry a roll of bills, counting not each piece but the length and weight of the whole string. Further west, in Persian and Central Asian markets, silver drachms and later dirhams did similar work, each region trusting its own familiar shapes of metal. A trader crossing from one currency zone into another had to learn, city by city, what counted as fair value. Imagine a money changer seated cross-legged in a shaded corner of a Central Asian bazaar, small scales balanced before him, a tray of coins from 4 or 5 different kingdoms spread across his cloth. A caravan merchant approaches, weary from the road, needing to convert Chinese copper into Persian silver before he can buy anything at all. The money changer weighs, murmurs, adjusts, and finally nods. A fair exchange, agreed upon by 2 strangers who will likely never meet again. This quiet, unglamorous transaction, repeated countless times across countless towns, was the true machinery that kept the whole distant trade turning. Trust between strangers on the Silk Road rarely rested on friendship. It rested on reputation, carried by word of mouth between towns. A merchant known to cheat customers in one oasis would find, weeks later, that traders in the next town already knew his name and refused to deal with him fairly. Reputation traveled the same roads as goods, sometimes faster, since a rumor needs no camel and no toll payment to cross a mountain pass. Long before any written credit record existed, a person's name was already their most valuable form of currency. Some merchants avoided carrying heavy coin at all, preferring instead a written promise that could be honored many miles away. Early forms of letters of credit, understood differently in Chinese, Persian, and later Islamic commercial custom, let a trader deposit value in one city and collect an equivalent sum in another, without ever moving a single coin across the dangerous road between them. This was not yet banking as we would recognize it, but it solved the very same old problem: how to move wealth without moving weight. Paper, ink, and a trusted name could do quietly what an armed guard over a coin chest could not always guarantee. This is what makes the money of the Silk Road so quietly fascinating. It was never one single system, but many overlapping ones, each translated at every border crossing by patient, careful hands. Bronze became silver, silver became silk itself, used as currency in a pinch, and silk in turn became grain, and grain became trust, passed from one town to the next like a long, unbroken sentence. No single emperor or caliph ever unified this system by decree. It unified itself, slowly, out of sheer necessity. Even now, most of the money moving through the modern world still depends on exactly this same old, patient translation between strangers. For nearly 3,000 years, the single greatest trade secret on Earth was not a formula or a weapon, but the quiet, patient labor of a small caterpillar. Chinese sericulture, the raising of silkworms on mulberry leaves and the careful unwinding of their cocoons into thread, remained a closely guarded state secret for centuries, protected by laws that made exporting silkworm eggs or mulberry seeds punishable by death. Foreign buyers could purchase finished silk in nearly unlimited quantities, yet the actual method of producing it stayed locked inside Chinese borders.
This single monopoly gave China an extraordinary economic advantage, allowing it to set prices for a good that no other civilization could yet replicate on its own. Even wealthy Roman households, dressed in imported silk, had no real understanding of how the fabric was made, and rumors circulated that it grew on trees like cotton, or was somehow combed from leaves.
This is what makes early silk so fascinating. An entire luxury economy was built for centuries on genuine, sustained ignorance. Imagine two Nestorian Christian monks, weary from years of travel, arriving at the Byzantine court with nothing more than a pair of hollow walking staffs, and inside those staffs, smuggled silkworm eggs that would change an empire's economy forever.
According to later Byzantine accounts, sometime in the 6th century CE, these monks carried the eggs westward from Central Asia at the Emperor Justinian's request, breaking China's centuries-long monopoly in a single daring act of industrial espionage.
Whether every detail of this story survived exactly as told, the underlying outcome is well established. Silk production eventually took root within the Byzantine Empire itself, and the flow of gold that had once traveled steadily eastward began, for the first time, to slow. This single transfer of biological knowledge reshaped an international balance of trade that had held firm for centuries. It is a striking reminder that in the ancient economy, the most valuable cargo was sometimes invisible, carried quietly inside a walking stick rather than openly across a caravan's back. Silk's value was never only about beauty, it was deeply tied to scarcity, and scarcity, once broken, changes an economy forever. Before the Byzantine Empire developed its own silk industry, virtually every thread of silk in the Mediterranean world had traveled thousands of miles overland, passing through dozens of hands, each one adding its own markup along the way. By the time a length of silk reached a Roman household, its price might easily have multiplied many times over from what it cost at its origin in a Chinese workshop. This layered markup system meant that no single merchant controlled silk's final price. Instead, the cost reflected the accumulated risk, distance, and profit of an entire chain of intermediaries. Once Byzantium began producing its own silk, that long chain shortened dramatically for the Western world, and prices that had once seemed permanent slowly began to ease. Even something as seemingly fixed as luxury pricing, it turns out, was never fixed at all. Only patient, until the monopoly finally broke. In Rome, silk was so tightly associated with excess that lawmakers occasionally tried to legislate against it, treating a fabric as though it were a moral hazard rather than a simple commodity.
The Roman Senate, worried about both the drain of silver eastward and the perceived decadence of silk-clad citizens, passed sumptuary laws restricting who could wear it and in what quantity. Men, in particular, were sometimes forbidden from wearing pure silk garments, since the fabric was associated with softness thought unbefitting a Roman citizen soldier.
These laws, however, were notoriously difficult to enforce, since demand for silk only grew stronger the more it was framed as forbidden or elite. Wealthy Romans often ignored the restrictions outright, wearing blended silk linen fabrics that technically avoided the letter of the law while satisfying the same desire for luxury.
Even in antiquity, it seems, a law built to suppress demand for a scarce good often did little more than advertise its appeal. Dyeing silk was its own separate economy, layered on top of the trade in raw thread, and certain colors carried a price tag that rivaled the silk itself. Tyrian purple, extracted drop by drop from the glands of sea snails along the Mediterranean coast, required tens of thousands of shellfish to produce even a small quantity of dye, making purple-dyed silk garments a luxury reserved almost exclusively for emperors and the highest nobility. Meanwhile, in China, particular shades of red and yellow silk were reserved by law for imperial use alone, and a commoner caught wearing the wrong color could face serious punishment regardless of how the fabric was obtained. Color, in this sense, functioned as a visible currency of status, layered directly onto a fabric that was already valuable in its undyed form. This meant that two identical bolts of silk could carry wildly different worth, simply based on which vat of dye they had passed through. Even now, it is a quiet reminder that value has rarely been about the object alone, but about the meaning a society chooses to attach to it. Chinese silk workshops themselves were remarkable feats of coordinated labor long before industrial factories existed anywhere in the world. Entire villages near the lower Yangtze River organized their yearly rhythms around the silkworm's life cycle, timing planting, feeding, and harvesting to match the insect's narrow window of activity each spring. Women typically oversaw much of this delicate labor, tending silkworms with an attentiveness closer to nursing an infant than farming a crop, since even slight temperature changes could kill an entire batch of worms. This labor rarely appeared in official histories, which tended to celebrate emperors and generals rather than the quiet, essential work of silk cultivation. Yet without it, none of the grand caravan economy further west could have existed at all. Every emperor's silk diplomacy, every merchant's fortune, and every Roman senator's outrage rested, ultimately, on the patient hands of workers whose names history rarely bothered to record. This is a pattern worth sitting with quietly. So much of history's great wealth was built upon labor that history itself chose not to remember. By the height of the Tang dynasty, silk production had grown so sophisticated that regional workshops developed distinct specialties, almost like modern brand identities competing across a shared marketplace. Certain cities became known for particular weaves, patterns, or thread counts, and merchants traveling west would specifically request silk from one region over another, much as a modern buyer might request a particular vineyard's wine. This regional specialization increased overall trade volume, since foreign buyers were no longer purchasing generic silk but specific, branded varieties with reputations attached. It also meant that skilled weavers held real economic leverage, since their specific technique could not easily be replicated elsewhere without years of training. Still, this specialization made the silk economy more fragile in its own way, since disruption to a single renowned workshop, whether through war, flood, or famine, could ripple outward and affect prices along the entire trade network. Even luxury, it seems, was never immune to the same fragile interdependence that shaped every other corner of the ancient economy. Eventually, silk itself began to travel less as a finished good and more as a kind of portable savings account, tucked away by merchants and nobles who trusted its resale value more than they trusted any single kingdom's coinage. A merchant crossing several unstable political territories might prefer to carry compact bolts of high-quality silk rather than heavy chests of coin, since silk retained recognized value across borders where local currencies did not. In this sense, silk functioned much like gold does in modern economies during times of uncertainty, valued not for its beauty alone, but for its portability and near-universal acceptance. Even soldiers and officials who received silk as payment often held on to it rather than spending it immediately, treating it as a hedge against the unpredictable inflation of local coinage. This is what makes the story of silk so quietly remarkable. A fabric meant originally for warmth and adornment slowly became one of history's most trusted early forms of portable, cross-border wealth. A camel could carry roughly its own body weight and still walk for days without water in true desert heat. This single biological fact shaped an entire economy, since the size of a caravan, the goods it could carry, and the profit at the far end all depended on how many such animals a merchant could afford, feed, and protect. Camel breeders and handlers became essential specialists in their own right, their knowledge as valuable as any trader's sense of price. An empire of silk and silver rested, in the end, on the patient endurance of a single stubborn animal. Caravanserais rose at regular intervals along the route, roughly 1 day's travel apart, offering shelter, water, and safety for the night. These fortified inns, built and maintained by local rulers, wealthy merchants, or religious foundations, charged fees for lodging while offering protection from bandits and the worst of the weather. Some were modest mud brick courtyards, others grew into elaborate stone complexes with stables, mosques, and storerooms built around a central square. Without this steady chain of safe stopping points, no caravan could have crossed the true emptiness of the desert at all. Imagine arriving at a caravanserai after a day of relentless sun, the gate swinging open into a cool stone courtyard filled with the smell of animals, bread, and tea. Merchants from 4 different countries unload their animals side by side, trading stories in broken fragments of shared language before the evening meal. By morning, strangers who barely understood one another's words have already exchanged news, warnings about the road ahead, and small favors that cost nothing but kindness. In a world without telegraphs or newspapers, these nightly gatherings were, in their own way, the road's true information network. Protection along the route was rarely free, and tolls were a constant, expected cost of doing business. Local rulers, tribal chieftains, and city governors all levied fees on passing caravans, sometimes justified as payment for safe passage, sometimes simply as the price of crossing land someone else controlled.
Merchants factored these costs into their prices from the very start, the way any trader today accounts for shipping and taxes before ever setting a final price.
A bolt of silk grew more expensive with every border it crossed, not because the silk itself changed, but because trust and safety always came with a price attached. Bandits were an ever-present risk, and caravans often traveled in large groups purely for safety and numbers. A small party of 2 or 3 merchants made an easy target, while a caravan of 100 camels, guarded by hired soldiers, was a far less appealing prize for any raiding party. Merchants who could not afford their own guards often paid to join a larger caravan already assembled, sharing costs and risks the way sailors once shared the dangers of a single voyage together. Even fierce competitors, ordinarily rivals in the marketplace, became temporary allies the moment the desert stretched out ahead of them. This is what makes the logistics of the Silk Road so quietly haunting. Every mile of profit was purchased first with risk, patience, and a great deal of unglamorous planning. Nothing about this trade was effortless or romantic in the moment it was actually lived. It was heat, thirst, tolls, and the constant low hum of danger endured for the sake of a payment still many weeks away. And yet, out of exactly this hardship, some of history's richest cities quietly grew. Fortune, it seems, has rarely arrived anywhere without first asking someone to cross a very long, very uncertain road. Samarkand grew wealthy not by making anything unique, but simply by sitting in exactly the right place. Positioned where routes from China, India, and Persia all converged, the city became a natural meeting point where goods changed hands, prices were set, and fortunes quietly shifted from one merchant family to another. Its rulers understood early that taxing trade passing through was often more profitable than producing goods themselves. Geography, it turns out, has always been its own kind of inheritance, handed to a city the way a name is handed to a child. Bukhara became famous across the medieval world for its libraries, its scholars, and its markets in equal measure. Trade wealth in the city funded schools and centers of learning, and in turn, the reputation of those scholars drew even more merchants eager to associate their goods with a place known for refinement and honest dealing. A city's intellectual reputation, it seems, could function almost like a brand, quietly raising the price buyers were willing to pay. Knowledge and commerce, so often treated as separate pursuits, have always leaned on one another more than either likes to admit. Kashgar sat at the western edge of the Taklamakan Desert, the last major stop before the truly punishing crossing began. Caravans gathered there for weeks at a time, resting animals, repairing equipment, and forming new traveling groups before attempting the desert's most dangerous stretch. The city's markets swelled with temporary abundance during these gathering periods, then quieted again once the caravans finally departed. Some towns thrived not on what they produced, but simply on being the last comfortable place before hardship began. Imagine walking through the Dunhuang market at dusk, oil lamps flickering against cave temple walls carved into a nearby cliff, monks and merchants moving through the same narrow lanes. A pilgrim traveling toward India might barter alongside a trader carrying lacquerware bound for Persia. Their goals utterly different, yet their road entirely the same. Dunhuang thrived precisely because it welcomed both kinds of traveler, treating faith and profit as two currencies equally worth accepting. Few places in history have managed to hold the sacred and the commercial so comfortably in the very same breath. Xi'an, then known as Chang'an, stood as one of the largest and most cosmopolitan cities on Earth during its height. Foreign quarters housed Persian, Sogdian, and Indian merchants living permanently within the city walls, each community maintaining its own customs while still participating fully in the wider imperial economy. Chang'an's markets were strictly regulated, with fixed hours, assigned locations for different goods, and officials who inspected weights and measures. Even in antiquity, a well-run market required rules, oversight, and a government willing to enforce fair dealing. Baghdad, founded centuries later near the Tigris, quickly became a western terminus rivaling any city further east. Its position let goods arriving overland connect easily with river and sea routes reaching toward the Mediterranean and beyond, making it a natural hinge between two enormous trading worlds. Scholars, merchants, and translators gathered there in numbers that few cities before it had ever matched. A city built at the right junction of routes could, within a single generation, become indispensable to an entire continent's trade. This is what makes the great cities of the Silk Road so quietly gripping. None of them grew wealthy purely through conquest or through resources buried beneath their own soil. Samarkand, Bukhara, Kashgar, Dunhuang, Chang'an, and Baghdad all prospered chiefly through position, patience, and the simple willingness to welcome strangers who might otherwise have passed them by. Wealth, in each of these places, was less something owned than something allowed to pass through, taking a small toll with every crossing. Perhaps a city, much like a person, becomes richest not by holding everything tightly, but by staying open to whoever arrives at its gates. No caravan, however well provisioned, could cross the deserts of Central Asia without the quiet economic miracle of the oasis city, and few were as vital as Kashgar. Sitting at the western edge of the Taklamakan Desert, Kashgar became a mandatory stopping point where routes from the north and south of the desert converged before continuing toward Persia and beyond. Merchants arriving after weeks of harsh travel found not just water, but marketplaces, moneylenders, translators, and inns ready to absorb whatever coin or silk they carried. Because nearly every caravan was forced to pass through it, Kashgar's rulers could levy taxes and tolls with little fear of merchants simply avoiding the city, giving the town outsized economic power relative to its modest size. Over centuries, this single geographic bottleneck transformed Kashgar from a minor desert settlement into one of the wealthiest trading hubs in Central Asia. Geography, it turns out, could make a small city as powerful as a distant empire, simply by sitting in the one place travelers had no choice but to pass through. Deep within the cliffs near the oasis town of Dunhuang, generations of merchants, monks, and travelers left behind something far more valuable to historians than gold: an enormous cave library of documents, contracts, and letters. The Mogao Caves, carved and decorated over roughly 1,000 years, preserved everything from Buddhist scripture to mundane trade records, offering modern historians a rare direct window into the daily economic life of the Silk Road. Among these documents were loan agreements, marriage contracts tied to property, and receipts for goods as ordinary as grain, cloth, and livestock. Far from a world of only grand emperors and legendary merchants, these records reveal a bustling, ordinary economy of small transactions, disputes, and everyday bargaining. This is what makes Dunhuang so quietly remarkable. Buried in a desert cliffside, it preserved not the story historians expected, but the far more human story of ordinary commerce, argument, and daily survival. Further west, the city of Samarkand grew so wealthy from its position along the trade routes that later travelers described it as one of the most beautiful cities on earth, its markets overflowing with goods from 3 continents at once. Sitting along a crucial junction of routes connecting China, India, and Persia, Samarkand attracted merchants, scholars, and craftsmen from an extraordinary range of cultures, each contributing something to the city's growing wealth and diversity. Its rulers understood early on that taxing trade, rather than merely producing goods themselves, could generate enormous revenue with comparatively little labor. Samarkand's paper-making industry, learned indirectly from Chinese prisoners of war after a distant battle, eventually made the city a major exporter of paper westward, spreading a Chinese invention across the Islamic world and eventually into Europe itself. Even a single captured craftsman's knowledge, transplanted into fertile new soil, could grow into an entirely new regional industry within a single generation. Not far from Samarkand, the city of Bukhara built its wealth on something almost as valuable as trade itself: reputation. Known across Central Asia for its scholars, craftsmen, and disciplined merchants, Bukhara developed a reputation for honest dealing that attracted traders who might otherwise have avoided the risks of an unfamiliar market. A merchant's willingness to travel out of his way toward a city known for fair weights and honest contracts speaks to how deeply reputation shaped ancient trade routes.
Bukhara's rulers also invested heavily in infrastructure: wells, covered marketplaces, and religious schools that doubled as centers of literacy and record-keeping, reinforcing the city's image as a place where business could be conducted with confidence. Over generations, this careful cultivation of trust became a genuine economic asset, drawing merchants who valued reliability over the fastest possible route.
Even now, it is worth remembering that some of history's wealthiest cities built their fortunes not on force, but on the quiet, patient accumulation of trust. Between the great cities, smaller settlements survived almost entirely because of a single invention, the caravanserai, a fortified roadside inn built specifically to shelter merchants, animals, and goods for the night. These structures, often built around a central courtyard, offered secure storage, stabling for camels and horses, and lodging for travelers who might otherwise face bandits or brutal weather in the open desert. Many caravanserais were funded not by individual innkeepers but by wealthy patrons, religious endowments, or local rulers who understood that safe travel routes meant steady tax revenue for their territory. A single well-placed caravanserai could transform an otherwise unremarkable stretch of desert into a reliable, repeatedly used trade corridor, since merchants naturally favored routes where safe rest was guaranteed. In this way, infrastructure itself became a form of economic strategy, deliberately built to funnel trade toward routes that benefited a particular ruler or city. Even in the ancient world, whoever controlled the resting places along a road often controlled the flow of wealth passing through it. Imagine arriving at a caravanserai after 11 straight days in the open desert, the smell of wood smoke and animal sweat mixing in the cool evening air as merchants from 4 different regions haggle quietly over dinner. Inside these walls, Persian, Sogdian, Chinese, and Indian traders might share the same courtyard for a single night, exchanging not just goods but rumors, prices, and warnings about the road ahead. Caravanserai keepers often served as informal brokers, aware of which merchants could be trusted and which had a reputation for disputes back down the road. These nightly gatherings functioned almost like informal marketplaces of information, where the value of a rumor about bandits or a flooded river crossing could be worth more than a whole day's cargo. It is easy to imagine the Silk Road only as a line of camels moving through empty desert, yet so much of its true economy happened after sunset, inside quiet courtyards like these. The Bactrian camel, with its 2 humps and thick winter coat, was in many ways the single most important piece of economic infrastructure along the entire overland route. Unlike horses, Bactrian camels could travel for days without water, carry heavy loads across sand and rocky terrain, and endure the punishing temperature swings of the Central Asian deserts, from bitter winter cold to blistering summer heat. A merchant's fortune often depended entirely on the health of his camels, since a single collapsed or injured animal could mean the loss of an entire season's cargo. Camel breeding and trading became its own specialized economy, with certain regions in Central Asia becoming known specifically for producing the strongest, most reliable pack animals. Experienced caravan leaders were paid a premium not for strength or speed, but for their intimate knowledge of which animals could endure a particular stretch of desert. In a landscape with no guaranteed roads or signposts, an animal's endurance and a guide's memory were, quite literally, worth more than gold. Water, more than any coin or bolt of silk, was the true currency that determined whether a Silk Road journey succeeded or ended in disaster. Oasis towns grew wealthy not merely from trade tolls, but from their sheer control over the only reliable water sources across hundreds of miles of otherwise barren desert. A ruler who controlled a critical well or spring effectively controlled the flow of an entire trade route, since merchants had no real alternative but to pay whatever price was demanded for access.
Disputes over water rights, though rarely recorded with the same detail as disputes over silk or silver, shaped the political fortunes of entire oasis kingdoms across the centuries. Some smaller settlements rose and fell entirely based on whether their wells remained productive, since a single dried spring could render an entire town irrelevant to passing trade within a single generation.
Even in a story so often told through silk and spice, it is worth remembering that water, quiet and unglamorous, was the resource upon which everything else depended. Not every oasis city thrived purely through peaceful trade. Many also depended on carefully calculated neutrality, positioning themselves as safe middle ground between larger, often hostile empires. Merv, one of the great oasis cities of Central Asia, prospered for centuries in part because it sat at a crossroads where Persian, Central Asian, and eventually Islamic political influence all met, and its rulers understood the value of remaining useful to all sides rather than allied firmly with one. This calculated neutrality allowed merchants from rival empires to trade safely within its walls, confident that political conflict elsewhere would not immediately spill into the marketplace. Such neutrality was always fragile, dependent on the goodwill of larger powers who could, in moments of conflict, choose to seize a wealthy oasis rather than respect its independence. Still, for long stretches of history, this careful diplomatic balancing act allowed cities like Merv to accumulate extraordinary wealth precisely by refusing to fully belong to any single empire. Even now, the same lesson holds in different forms. A city, or a person, that remains useful to many sides often outlasts one that commits fully to only one. By the time trade along these routes reached its medieval peak, oasis cities had developed surprisingly sophisticated commercial institutions, including early forms of contract law adapted to merchants who might never meet again after a single transaction. Local courts in cities like Bukhara and Samarkand developed standardized procedures for resolving trade disputes, often drawing on Islamic legal traditions that provided clear rules for partnership, debt, and shared risk in long-distance ventures. These legal frameworks mattered enormously in a world where a merchant might vanish over the horizon for years at a time, making informal trust alone an unreliable foundation for larger transactions.
Written contracts, witnessed by local judges or respected community elders, gave merchants some recourse if a distant partner failed to honor an agreement, even if enforcement across such vast distances remained genuinely difficult. This slow development of formal commercial law, born from simple practical necessity, quietly laid groundwork for legal traditions that would later shape trade far beyond Central Asia.
Even the driest legal document, it turns out, can carry within it centuries of hard-won human experience about what happens when trust alone is not enough. Paper traveled west long before most Europeans ever saw a sheet of it, carried quietly by prisoners rather than merchants. Following a battle between Chinese and Abbasid forces in the 8th century, captured papermakers reportedly shared their craft in Samarkand, and from there the technique spread steadily toward the Islamic world and eventually into Europe. A single battle, remembered mostly for its bloodshed, ended up reshaping how the entire world would one day record its knowledge. History rarely announces its most important moments. They often arrive disguised as something else entirely. Spices moved along both the overland road and its maritime cousin, carrying value utterly disproportionate to their weight. Pepper, cinnamon, and cloves, grown only in specific and often distant regions, became so valuable in medieval Europe that they were sometimes used almost like currency, accepted in place of coin for rents, dowries, and debts. A pouch of pepper, light enough to carry in one hand, could be worth more than a laborer's wages for an entire year. Rarity, more than usefulness alone, has always had a strange power to set a price. Glassware moved in the opposite direction, traveling east from Roman and later Islamic workshops toward China and beyond. Chinese elites prized foreign glass precisely because it was rare and difficult to produce locally, much as European buyers prized silk for exactly the same reason. Each civilization, it seems, found the other's ordinary craft impossibly exotic, simply by virtue of distance. Perhaps nothing is truly rare in itself. It is only ever rare from somewhere far enough away. Tea began as a regional drink in southern China and only slowly became a trade good carried along northern and western routes. Compressed into bricks for easier transport, tea could be carried by caravan for months without spoiling, eventually reaching Tibet, Central Asia, and beyond as both a beverage and, at times, a form of payment. Brick tea, in some border regions, circulated so reliably that merchants accepted it almost as they would accept coin.
A good becomes a currency the moment enough strangers agree, quietly and without ceremony, that it will always be worth something.
Imagine a caravan halted at a border post, officials carefully unwrapping bolts of silk to inspect quality before assessing the toll owed. Nearby, a separate cart carries pressed tea bricks stacked like bricks of stone, destined for a monastery high in distant mountains. Neither good will reach its final buyer for many more weeks, yet both already carry an agreed value, fixed by custom long before either shipment arrived. Price, on this road, was rarely invented on the spot. It was inherited, town by town, like a long-remembered rule. Gunpowder, invented in China initially for purposes closer to medicine and fireworks than warfare, eventually traveled the same routes as silk and spice. Knowledge of its composition spread gradually westward over centuries, reaching the Islamic world and Europe long before European armies fully understood how to weaponize it themselves. A discovery born from alchemists searching for long life ended up, generations later, reshaping the entire nature of war. Even the most peaceful intentions, once released into the wider world, cannot always control what becomes of them. Porcelain earned China's export trade a reputation for quality so strong that the material itself still carries the country's name in English. Chinese kilns produced wares so fine and so difficult to imitate that, for centuries, foreign buyers paid enormous premiums simply for goods marked as genuinely Chinese in origin. Later, when other regions finally learned to imitate the technique, the value of true origin only became more fiercely guarded. A reputation built over centuries can outlast the very secret that first earned it. Horses moved east to west and west to east in equally significant numbers, prized wherever local breeds could not match their strength or speed. Central Asian horses, in particular, were prized by Chinese armies for their endurance, sometimes traded for enormous quantities of silk in exchanges that functioned almost like formal treaties between rival powers. A single strong warhorse could be worth dozens of bolts of the finest cloth a workshop could produce. Even in trade, some goods were never really about luxury at all, but about survival. Dyes extracted from insects, plants, and minerals traveled the routes as carefully guarded specialties, each region proud of colors no other could quite reproduce. A particular shade of red, blue, or purple could become so associated with one city's workshops that buyers would pay extra simply to be certain of its origin. Counterfeiters existed even then, mixing cheaper dyes and hoping buyers would not notice the difference before the sale was complete.
The temptation to imitate a valuable name is, it seems, exactly as old as value itself.
This is what makes the goods of the Silk Road so quietly remarkable. Silk, paper, spice, tea, glass, gunpowder, porcelain, horses, and dye were never simply objects changing hands. Each one carried, folded invisibly inside it, an entire history of soil, craft, distance, and desire, understood differently by every hand it passed through. A merchant selling pepper in Venice had likely never seen the vine it grew on, just as a farmer growing that pepper had likely never imagined a Venetian table. And yet, across thousands of miles and countless strangers, the two were connected by nothing more than a long, patient chain of trust. Buddhism spread from India into Central Asia and China, largely along the same routes carried by ordinary trade caravans. Monks often traveled with merchant groups for safety, and in return, merchants sometimes funded monasteries and temples along the way, treating religious patronage almost as an investment in safe passage. Cave temples carved into cliffs near trading towns became both spiritual refuges and, quietly, waypoints of commerce. Faith and trade, so often imagined as opposites, traveled these roads holding hands the entire way. Islam spread eastward along similar routes several centuries later, carried as much by merchants as by any army or missionary. Muslim traders settled in trading cities across Central Asia and China, establishing communities that blended commercial reputation with religious identity, since a shared faith often made trust between strangers easier to establish. Belonging to the same religious community could function almost like a business reference, vouching silently for a merchant's honesty. Shared belief, in a world without any central authority to enforce contracts, became its own quiet form of insurance. Sogdian merchants, from a region in modern Central Asia, became so essential to Silk Road trade that their language served as a common tongue across much of the route. For centuries, Sogdian traders operated trading colonies stretching from Persia to China, functioning almost like an early multinational network bound together by kinship, language, and shared commercial custom. Few empires ever controlled as much of the road's actual daily commerce as this one loosely connected merchant people did. Sometimes the most powerful force along a trade route is not an army, but a shared language spoken fluently by everyone who matters. Imagine a Sogdian trading post, far from any Sogdian homeland, its ledgers written in a script few locals could read, its walls decorated with images from 3 different faiths at once. A local farmer arrives to sell wool, a Buddhist monk stops to rest, and a Muslim merchant negotiates a shipment of dye, all within the same small courtyard. No one there finds this unusual. It is simply how the road has always worked. Tolerance on this route was rarely a philosophy. It was simply good business sense, practiced quietly every single day. Religious minorities often thrived precisely in these trading towns, protected less by law than by their usefulness to commerce. Christian, Jewish, Zoroastrian, Buddhist, and Muslim merchants frequently lived within the same cities, each community maintaining its own customs while still trading freely with the others. Rulers who wished to profit from trade generally learned, sooner or later, that persecuting a productive merchant community cost more than it ever gained.
Even where tolerance was imperfect and often fragile, pure self-interest did more to protect diversity than any single decree ever could. Marriage alliances between merchant families from different regions helped bind trading networks together across generations.
A daughter married into a distant trading family did more than create a personal bond. She created a lasting commercial relationship, trusted for decades, that no single contract could have guaranteed on its own. Family ties, stretched across enormous distances, became a quiet substitute for the modern legal contracts that did not yet exist. Trust, it seems, has always traveled most safely when it is carried inside a family rather than written onto a page. Translators and interpreters became indispensable, quiet professionals without whom almost no cross-cultural trade could function at all. A skilled interpreter, fluent in several languages of the road, could earn a comfortable living simply by standing between two merchants who could not otherwise understand a single word the other said. Entire negotiations, worth fortunes in silk and silver, depended on the honesty of a single person translating both sides fairly. Some of history's most important economic relationships rested, in the end, on nothing more than one trustworthy voice in the middle. This is what makes the human side of the Silk Road so quietly moving. Commerce here was never separate from faith, family, or language, but woven tightly through all three. A caravan crossing the desert carried monks beside merchants, translators beside traders, and strangers of every belief, learning, out of pure necessity, to deal honestly with one another. No empire ever forced this cooperation into existence. Distance and mutual need did that work far more gently and far more effectively on their own. Perhaps trade, at its oldest and truest, was never really about goods at all. It was about learning, again and again, how to trust someone unlike yourself. Long before paper money existed anywhere in the world, merchants along the Silk Road faced a very practical problem. How do you carry enough wealth for a year-long journey without carrying so much metal that bandits, or simple exhaustion, defeat you before you arrive?
Coins minted in one kingdom rarely held official value in the next, forcing merchants to constantly exchange currencies at rates that shifted depending on local trust, metal purity, and simple negotiation. Sogdian traders became particularly skilled at this constant currency conversion, often carrying multiple types of coins simultaneously and calculating value on the spot using little more than experience and memory.
Sasanian silver drachms, prized for their consistent purity, circulated far beyond Persia's borders, sometimes accepted in markets thousands of miles from where they were minted, simply because merchants trusted their weight and silver content. Even Chinese copper cash, strung together on cords in standardized counts, occasionally traveled west, valued more for its reliable minting than for any political loyalty attached to it. This is what makes early Silk Road currency so fascinating. Trust in a coin's metal often mattered more than trust in the empire that struck it. Eventually, the sheer difficulty of moving physical coin across such enormous distances inspired one of history's quieter financial innovations: paper instruments that represented value without the weight of metal at all.
During the Tang Dynasty, Chinese merchants developed what came to be called fei qian, or flying money, a system in which a merchant could deposit coin with an authorized agent in one city and receive a paper certificate redeemable for the same value in a distant city. This innovation dramatically reduced the risk of theft along the road, since a bandit who stole a piece of paper gained nothing without also controlling the network that honored it. Government offices and wealthy merchant guilds served as the trusted intermediaries who issued and redeemed these certificates, effectively functioning as an early, informal banking network stretched across the empire. Though it was never intended as circulating currency in its own right, Fei Qian planted a quiet seed of an idea. That value could be represented on paper, backed by trust in an institution, rather than the weight of metal in hand. Centuries before modern banknotes existed anywhere else in the world, that idea was already flying quietly along the roads of Tang, China. Weight, more than any single coin, remained the great unresolved headache of Silk Road commerce, since no two regions ever seemed to agree on quite how heavy a pound, a caddy, or a mina truly was. A merchant carrying silver from Persia toward China had to constantly recalculate value, not just by currency, but by whichever local weight standard happened to be in use at each stop along the way.
Marketplaces often employed professional weighers, trusted specifically because they owned calibrated scales and carried a reputation for honesty that individual merchants, arriving as strangers, simply could not match.
Disputes over shaved coins, mixed alloys, or mismeasured silver were common enough that many cities developed standardized testing procedures, sometimes involving simple methods like biting metal or scratching it against a touchstone to estimate purity. This constant friction over measurement might seem like a minor inconvenience, yet across thousands of transactions it added real, unavoidable cost to every single exchange along the route.
Even now, it is worth remembering how much of ancient trade's true difficulty lay not in grand politics, but in the small, exhausting arithmetic of simply agreeing on how much something weighed. Imagine a merchant seated cross-legged in a Bukhara marketplace, weighing out silver coins on a small bronze scale, while a local money changer squints at each one, testing its edge with a practiced thumbnail. Money changers like this one became indispensable fixtures of every major Silk Road marketplace, converting currencies, testing purity, and often extending short-term credit to merchants waiting for a delayed shipment to arrive. Their profits came from the narrow margin between buying and selling rates, a business model recognizable even now in modern currency exchange counters at any international airport. Over time, particularly trusted money changers built reputations that extended well beyond their home city, with merchants specifically seeking them out on repeat visits rather than risking an unfamiliar counter. Some money-changing families grew wealthy enough to fund entire caravans themselves, effectively becoming early financiers of long-distance trade rather than simple currency dealers. It is a quiet thread running through this entire history. Wherever goods must cross borders, someone eventually finds a way to profit simply from managing the exchange itself. Beyond currency and weight, credit itself became an essential, if quietly dangerous, tool of Silk Road commerce, allowing merchants to trade far beyond whatever coin they personally carried.
Wealthy merchant houses in cities like Samarkand or Bukhara would extend loans to smaller traders, financing an entire caravan's goods in exchange for a share of the eventual profit, a practice remarkably similar to modern venture financing. This arrangement spread risk across multiple parties, since a single failed journey, whether from bandit attack, disease, or simple bad luck, would not fall entirely on one merchant's shoulders alone.
Islamic legal traditions eventually formalized versions of this practice, most notably in partnership structures where one party provided capital and another provided labor and risk, sharing profit according to a pre-agreed ratio.
Yet credit of this kind always carried genuine danger, since a merchant who overborrowed against future profit could be ruined entirely by a single bad season, with debts following him long after the caravan itself had returned home empty. Even in the ancient world, the same quiet truth held. Credit could build a fortune quickly, but it could just as easily unravel one. Not every payment along the Silk Road involved coin or paper at all. Barter, in its oldest and simplest form, remained stubbornly persistent even centuries after sophisticated currencies had developed. In remote oasis markets far from major cities, a merchant might trade bolts of cloth directly for wool, dried fruit, or salt, especially when local coinage was scarce, debased, or simply distrusted by wary traders passing through. Salt, in particular, held remarkable value across much of Central Asia, sometimes functioning almost like a currency in its own right, since it was essential for preserving meat during long desert crossings. Barter required none of the trust in distant institutions that paper credit demanded, only trust in the immediate, visible value of the goods exchanged hand to hand. This made barter a reliable fallback whenever political instability undermined confidence in official coinage. a pattern repeated again and again whenever empires along the route weakened or collapsed. Even the most sophisticated financial systems, it seems, always kept this older, simpler form of exchange quietly waiting in reserve. By the height of medieval trade, certain trading families had grown wealthy enough to function almost like private financial institutions, extending letters of credit that were honored across enormous distances purely on the strength of a family name. A merchant carrying a letter from a well-known Sogdian or Persian trading house could present it in a distant city and receive goods or coin on credit, with the understanding that the issuing family would eventually settle the debt through their own extensive network of contacts. This system depended entirely on reputation, since there was no overarching government or court capable of enforcing such an agreement across multiple rival empires.
A family that failed to honor even a single letter risked losing access to this entire cooperative network, a consequence severe enough that most treated their word as more binding than any written contract. In this way, an informal but remarkably effective international credit system emerged centuries before anything resembling a modern bank, built entirely on the patient, cross-generational cultivation of trust.
This is what makes it so quietly remarkable. Some of history's earliest international finance ran not on law, but on the simple, fragile strength of a family's honor. Inflation, too, was no stranger to the ancient economies connected by these trade routes, and its effects rippled outward across the network in ways merchants understood long before anyone had a word for the phenomenon. When a struggling empire debased its coinage, mixing cheaper metals into what should have been pure silver or gold, merchants along the trade routes noticed almost immediately, adjusting their exchange rates to reflect the coin's true, diminished value. This meant that a ruler's attempt to quietly stretch a shrinking treasury often failed the moment the debased coin left home territory, since foreign merchants refused to accept it at face value.
Some rulers responded by trying to force acceptance of debased currency through decree, a strategy that rarely worked for long, since merchants could simply reroute trade toward more stable neighboring markets instead. Over time, the empires that maintained consistent, trustworthy currency tended to attract more trade and prosperity than those that repeatedly debased their coin for short-term gain. Even across a distance of thousands of miles and countless centuries, it seems merchants everywhere shared the same quiet instinct. Trust, once broken by a debased coin, was never easily restored. A single empire once stretched so wide that a merchant could cross half of Asia under one ruler's protection. By the 13th century, the Mongol conquests had united an enormous span of territory from China to Eastern Europe under related branches of the same ruling family, creating what historians later called the Pax Mongolica, a rough but real peace across the road. Trade that once required negotiating with dozens of separate rulers could now, in long stretches, proceed under a single set of rules. Even conquest, brutal as it was, sometimes left behind an unintended gift of order. The Mongol Khans understood early that thriving trade meant thriving tax revenue, and so they actively protected merchants traveling their territory. Roads were patrolled, bandits punished harshly, and merchants who suffered losses within Mongol lands could sometimes seek compensation from local officials, an early and imperfect form of trade protection. This was not kindness for its own sake. A wealthy, active trade route filled Mongol treasuries far more reliably than a road left lawless and empty. Self-interest, once again, proved a far more reliable protector of commerce than any purely moral appeal ever could. Imagine a merchant crossing from Persia into Mongol-controlled China, presenting a paisa,
a metal tablet granting safe passage and access to relay stations along the way. At each stop, fresh horses and lodging wait for him, provided almost like a service guaranteed by the empire itself. What once took months of careful negotiation with local rulers now moves with startling, almost bureaucratic efficiency. Even the harshest empires, it turns out, can occasionally build systems gentler and more reliable than the chaos that came before them. Marco Polo's famous journey east happened precisely during this Mongol peace, which is likely why his passage was possible at all. Traveling with his father and uncle, merchants themselves, the young Venetian crossed thousands of miles under Mongol protection, eventually reaching the court of Kublai Khan and remaining in Mongol service for years before returning home. Whatever the exact accuracy of every detail in his later account, the underlying reality it describes, a functioning, protected trade network spanning a continent, reflects genuine historical conditions. Sometimes a single traveler's story becomes the lens through which an entire era is remembered. Postal relay systems built by the Mongols allowed messages, and sometimes goods, to move faster across Asia than at almost any point before the modern era. Riders passed information from station to station, each covering a set distance before handing off to a fresh horse and rider, allowing news to travel remarkable distances within days rather than months. Merchants benefited indirectly, since faster news of prices, dangers, and demand let trading decisions be made with far less guesswork than before. Information, even then, was already recognized as a form of wealth worth protecting and moving quickly. Not everything about Mongol rule served trade gently, and conquest itself came at an enormous human cost. Cities that resisted Mongol armies were sometimes destroyed outright, their populations killed or scattered, a brutal price paid long before any resulting peace could benefit later generations of merchants. The prosperity that followed conquest can never fully be separated from the violence that made it possible in the first place. Even history's calmest chapters of trade were rarely built without cost paid, somewhere earlier, in blood. The Mongol peace did not last forever, and by the mid-14th century the unified empire had begun fragmenting into rival successor states. As central authority weakened, tolls multiplied again, banditry returned in places, and the smooth, protected passage merchants had come to expect grew steadily less reliable. What one generation had enjoyed as an unusually safe road, the next generation slowly relearned to treat with the old caution. Peace along any long trade route, it seems, has always been a fragile, borrowed thing, never quite permanent. This is what makes the Mongol century so quietly haunting. The very empire that unified a continent's trade through conquest also destroyed, along the way, some of the very cities and peoples that trade depended upon. Prosperity and devastation traveled the same roads at the same time, inseparable from one another however much later merchants might have wished otherwise. History rarely offers a clean peace bought without any cost at all. Perhaps every great age of open trade owes something uncomfortable to the disorder or conquest that came directly before it. Buddhism's spread across Central Asia and into China was never simply a matter of faith traveling on its own. It moved, quite literally, in the company of merchants who saw genuine practical value in supporting it. Wealthy traders often donated generously to Buddhist monasteries along the trade routes, seeking blessings for a safe journey, and in return, monasteries offered lodging, storage, and a sense of community for travelers far from home. This mutually beneficial relationship meant that Buddhist monasteries grew wealthy alongside the very trade routes that carried their teachings outward, creating a religious network that expanded in step with commercial expansion rather than separately from it. Cave complexes like those at Dunhuang were funded largely through merchant patronage, transforming remote desert cliffs into some of the richest artistic and religious sites in the ancient world. In this way, faith and finance were never truly separate forces along these routes. Each quietly depended on the other's steady growth. This is what makes it so fascinating. Some of history's most beautiful religious art exists today only because merchants once believed it was good business to fund it. Monasteries themselves eventually became something close to financial institutions, offering services that modern readers might recognize as early forms of banking. Buddhist monasteries in China accumulated significant wealth through donations, land holdings, and trade in goods like tea and textiles, and some began extending loans to merchants and farmers, charging modest interest in exchange for the risk involved. Grain storage, too, became a monastic specialty, with monasteries maintaining reserves that could be lent out during lean years and repaid with interest once harvests improved. This practice, sometimes called monastic pawnbroking by later historians, gave ordinary people access to credit they might never have received from a distant, indifferent imperial government. Naturally, this financial power occasionally drew suspicion or resentment from secular authorities, who worried that religious institutions were accumulating wealth and influence beyond their intended spiritual purpose. Even sacred spaces, it turns out, were never fully separate from the quiet, practical economics of lending, storing, and repaying that shaped every other corner of Silk Road life. Nestorian Christianity, a branch of the faith that split from the mainstream church over theological disputes in the 5th century, found an unlikely second home along the trade routes of Central Asia, carried westward and eastward largely by merchant communities. Barred from favor within the Byzantine Empire, many Nestorian Christians migrated toward Persia and beyond, eventually establishing communities as far east as China itself, where a famous stone monument still records their presence at the Tang imperial court. These communities often clustered specifically around trade routes, since merchant networks offered both economic opportunity and a built-in social structure for a faith operating far from its original homeland. Nestorian merchants, much like their Buddhist and later Islamic counterparts, relied heavily on trust between fellow believers scattered across vast distances, using shared faith as a kind of informal insurance against dishonest dealing. This pattern repeats again and again throughout Silk Road history. Whenever a religious minority found itself excluded from power at home, the trade routes offered both refuge and genuine economic opportunity elsewhere. Even displacement, it seems, could quietly become the seed of an entirely new trading network. The rise of Islam in the 7th century reshaped Silk Road commerce more thoroughly than perhaps any single development before it, not merely through conquest, but through a genuinely sophisticated new framework for commercial law. Islamic legal scholars developed detailed rules governing partnership, shared risk, and profit distribution in trade ventures, most notably in structures like mudaraba, where one party supplied capital and another supplied labor and expertise, sharing eventual profit according to an agreed ratio, while the capital provider alone bore any financial loss.
This framework gave merchants a clear, religiously sanctioned structure for pooling resources on risky, long-distance ventures without any single party bearing unlimited personal liability. Because Islamic law also prohibited charging fixed interest on loans, merchants developed creative alternatives, structuring transactions as genuine partnerships or delayed payment sales rather than straightforward interest-bearing loans. These innovations spread rapidly across the vast territories eventually unified under Islamic rule,
creating a surprisingly consistent commercial legal framework stretching from Spain to Central Asia. This is what makes it so remarkable. Centuries before anything resembling modern corporate law existed in Europe, merchants across the Islamic world were already operating under a shared, sophisticated system of shared risk and reward. Trust between merchants of entirely different faiths remained, for most of Silk Road history, a genuinely practical necessity rather than an ideal to be admired from a distance. A Buddhist merchant from China, a Zoroastrian trader from Persia, and a Muslim caravan leader from Central Asia might all share the same caravanserai courtyard on a given night, each relying on the other's honesty, despite holding entirely different beliefs about the nature of the universe itself. Religious differences rarely prevented commercial partnership outright, since the economic incentive to trade successfully generally outweighed theological disagreement, at least in the practical, day-to-day conduct of business. Local rulers, too, often protected merchants of minority faiths, specifically because their trade networks brought valuable revenue into a kingdom's treasury, regardless of what god or gods those merchants happened to worship. This pragmatic tolerance was never universal, and periods of religious tension or persecution certainly interrupted trade in various regions across different centuries. Still, taken as a whole, the Silk Road quietly demonstrates something worth remembering. Shared economic interest has, again and again, throughout history, encouraged people of very different beliefs to find a way to work together. Pilgrimage and trade, far from being separate journeys, frequently overlapped along these same desert routes, with religious travelers often joining merchant caravans purely for the shared safety and resources such groups provided. A Buddhist monk traveling from China toward India to study at a famous monastery might spend months walking alongside merchants entirely unconnected to his spiritual mission, benefiting from their guides, their guards, and their knowledge of safe water sources along the way. In return, merchants sometimes valued the presence of respected religious travelers, believing their company brought a measure of protection or blessing to an otherwise dangerous journey. This overlap meant that religious and commercial knowledge often traveled together quite literally, carried by the same feet across the same mountain passes and desert crossings. Famous travelers like the monk Xuanzang, whose 7th century journey to India for Buddhist scripture became legendary, recorded extensive details about the economies and marketplaces he passed through along the way. Blending spiritual memoir with careful commercial observation. Even a journey undertaken purely for faith, it seems, could not help but also become a quiet record of the economies it passed through. Religious endowments, known in the Islamic world as waqf, became a particularly important form of long-term economic infrastructure along the later Silk Road, funding everything from caravanserais to schools to public wells. A wealthy merchant or ruler might dedicate property or income permanently to charitable purposes, creating an endowment that, by religious and legal tradition, could never be sold, seized, or redirected for private profit once established. This structure gave certain public infrastructure remarkable durability, since a caravanserai funded through waqf might continue operating for centuries, entirely independent of whichever dynasty happened to rule the surrounding territory at a given moment. Merchants traveling these routes came to rely on this infrastructure specifically because its religious protection made it more stable than facilities built purely through private, and therefore more fragile, commercial investment. In this way, religious charitable structures quietly became one of the most reliable forms of long-term economic planning available in the ancient and medieval world. Even now, it is worth pausing on this. Some of history's most durable infrastructure survived not because a government protected it, but because faith itself did. Religious tolerance along these trade routes, however, was never guaranteed, and moments of persecution or forced conversion did occasionally disrupt entire trading communities that had taken generations to build. Certain periods saw religious minorities expelled or heavily taxed specifically for their faith, scattering merchant networks that had once operated with relative security across multiple kingdoms. Such disruptions carried real economic consequences, since the sudden loss of an established trading community's local knowledge and cross-border contacts could take generations to rebuild elsewhere. It would be dishonest to romanticize this history entirely as one of seamless cooperation between faiths, when the record also includes real moments of exclusion, suspicion, and hardship for religious minorities along these same roads. Still, even accounting for these darker chapters, the broader pattern across centuries leaned toward pragmatic coexistence, simply because trade itself rarely flourished in an atmosphere of constant persecution. This is a reminder worth sitting with quietly. Prosperity and tolerance, however imperfectly practiced, tended to travel together far more often than history's harsher chapters might suggest. Trade routes that carried silk and spice also, tragically, carried disease, following the very same paths that carried prosperity.
The plague that devastated much of Eurasia in the 14th century is widely believed to have traveled west along Silk Road trade and military routes, moving with fleas carried by rodents that hitched rides on the same caravans and ships that carried goods.
Historians still study the exact routes carefully, but the broad pattern, a network built for trade also serving, unintentionally, as a network for illness, is now widely accepted. The very connections that make trade possible have always, quietly, made suffering easier to share as well. We will not dwell on the suffering of that plague here, only acknowledge it honestly, as one must when telling this story with any real care. Whole towns along the road lost enormous portions of their population within a single season. Trade routes fell silent for a time, and merchant families were broken apart alongside everyone else. Even the busiest, wealthiest roads humanity has ever built could not outrun what traveled quietly alongside their goods. Perhaps this, more than any single profit or fortune, is the truest reminder that no network of trade has ever existed apart from the fragile human lives that built it. Financial ruin along the Silk Road rarely arrived through disease alone. More often, it arrived through the simple, ordinary risk of the road itself. A single lost caravan, to bandits, to a sudden desert storm, to a river crossing gone wrong, could bankrupt a merchant family that had invested everything in that one shipment. Unlike a modern investor, spreading risk across many small holdings, most Silk Road merchants staked entire fortunes on a handful of journeys at a time. Every fortune made on this road walked hand in hand with the very real possibility of losing everything at once. Imagine a merchant family waiting anxiously in Kashgar for a caravan that should have arrived weeks earlier, carrying nearly everything the family owned in silk and silver. Rumors drift in slowly, a sandstorm near the western passes, perhaps bandits, perhaps simply delay, and no one can yet say which explanation is true. Some families in exactly this position waited for news that never came at all. Their fortunes and sometimes their loved ones lost somewhere along an unmarked stretch of road. Behind every romantic image of the Silk Road lies this same quiet, ever-present possibility of loss. Currency debasement, the quiet practice of reducing the precious metal content in coins while keeping their face value the same, plagued several empires along the route at different times. Rulers facing financial strain sometimes debased their coinage to stretch limited treasuries further, only to find that merchants quickly noticed and adjusted prices upward to compensate. Trust, once damaged by an obviously debased coin, was difficult to fully restore even after honest coinage returned. A currency, much like a reputation, is far easier to weaken than it is to repair. War between rival empires periodically closed sections of the road entirely, cutting off trade for months or years at a stretch. Conflicts between Byzantine and Persian powers, and later between various Islamic and Central Asian states, repeatedly disrupted established routes, forcing merchants to find longer, more expensive, and often more dangerous alternatives. Some merchant families adapted by diversifying routes and goods. Others, less flexible, simply did not survive the disruption. Trade, across every century we have visited tonight, has always depended on a peace it could never itself guarantee. Debt among merchants could pass down through generations, inherited the way land or a family name might be inherited elsewhere. A trader who died owing money to partners in a distant city left that obligation to his heirs, who were expected, by strong custom, if not always by law, to honor debts they had never personally incurred. This system depended entirely on family reputation lasting far longer than any single lifetime. Perhaps this is why merchant families guarded their names so carefully. A name, unlike a single fortune, could be inherited, damaged, or restored across many decades. This is what makes the risks of the Silk Road so quietly sobering. Disease, war, debasement, and simple bad luck could undo in a single season what patience and skill had built across many years. Every prophet recorded in these stories came paired, somewhere unspoken, with a matching story of loss that history remembers far less often. We do not tell these harder chapters to dwell on suffering, only to be honest about the true cost woven quietly into every fortune made along this road. Perhaps understanding history clearly, rather than only comfortably, is itself a small act of respect toward everyone who once walked it. Islamic commercial law developed sophisticated partnership structures long before similar ideas took firm root in medieval Europe. Arrangements known broadly as mudaraba allowed one party to provide capital, while another provided labor and expertise on a trading voyage, with profits shared according to agreed ratios and losses generally borne by the investor rather than the traveling merchant. This let wealthy but immobile investors fund distant, risky trading expeditions without ever leaving home themselves. Long before the word existed, something very close to venture investing was already quietly financing camel caravans across entire deserts. Waqf institutions, charitable endowments under Islamic law, often funded caravanserais, wells, and bridges that kept trade routes functioning smoothly. A wealthy merchant or ruler might endow property whose income was permanently dedicated to maintaining a particular caravanserai or water source, ensuring its upkeep long after the original donor had died. In this way, private wealth quietly became public infrastructure, sustained not by ongoing taxation but by a single generous decision made generations earlier. Some of the road's most reliable comforts were never built by empires at all, but by individuals choosing to fund something larger than their own lifetime. Venetian and Genoese merchants, trading at the Mediterranean end of these networks, developed early forms of double-entry bookkeeping to track increasingly complex transactions. As trade grew more layered, involving partnerships, loans, and goods held on consignment, simple record-keeping no longer sufficed, and merchants began recording both sides of every transaction to catch errors and fraud more easily. This innovation, refined over generations, eventually became foundational to modern accounting practice everywhere. Sometimes the quiet solution to an accounting headache outlives the empire, and even the trade route that first demanded it. Imagine a Venetian merchant's counting house late at night, ledgers spread across a wide table, candlelight flickering over columns of careful ink. Every bale of silk purchased in the East, every debt owed to a partner in Constantinople, every coin advanced against a future shipment is entered twice, checked against itself. Outside, the canal is quiet, but inside, an entire distant trade network is quietly being reduced to numbers that must, in the end, balance. Long before telegraphs or ledgers crossed oceans instantly, patient ink and careful arithmetic already held these vast trading relationships together. Bills of exchange let merchants avoid transporting large sums of actual coin across dangerous distances, relying instead on a written instruction honored by a trusted partner elsewhere. A merchant in Bruges could pay a debt owed in Constantinople simply by presenting a signed bill, redeemable through a network of correspondent merchants who trusted one another's signatures completely. This system depended entirely on reputation stretching across vast distances, since a single dishonored bill could damage a merchant's standing in cities he had never even visited. Trust, once again, proved lighter and safer to carry than any chest of silver ever could. Family banking houses, some of which would later grow into famous European institutions, often began simply as successful long-distance trading families. Profits earned from trade in silk, spice, and wool were gradually redirected into lending, since a family with reliable income and trusted correspondents in many cities was naturally well positioned to finance others' ventures as well. Trade wealth, once accumulated, rarely stayed still. It almost always sought a second life as capital lent forward to someone else's journey. Perhaps this is the oldest rule of accumulated wealth. It rarely rests, preferring instead to keep moving, quietly, toward wherever trust allows it to travel next. Interest and usury remained deeply contested across every tradition touched by this trade, debated by scholars in mosque, church, and academy alike. Islamic and Christian legal traditions both wrestled, in different ways and different centuries, with how to permit necessary commercial lending while still condemning exploitative interest charged against the desperate or the poor. Clever legal structures on all sides often found ways to achieve, functionally, what strict doctrine forbade outright. Perhaps no question in economic history has been argued longer or resolved less completely than what counts as a fair price for lending money. This is what makes the financial innovations along the Silk Road so quietly fascinating. Partnerships, endowments, bookkeeping, and bills of exchange all emerged not from any single genius, but from thousands of merchants slowly solving the same recurring problem: how to move value safely across distance and time. Each solution borrowed a little from the one before it, refined gradually across centuries and cultures that rarely spoke directly to one another. Nothing about modern banking, in the end, was invented all at once. It was assembled slowly, one careful ledger at a time. Perhaps every financial system we now take for granted began its life exactly this way, as a quiet, patient answer to a very old and very human worry. If any single people could claim the title of the Silk Road's true professional merchant class, it would almost certainly be the Sogdians, a Central Asian people whose homeland lay between Samarkand and Bukhara. For nearly 1,000 years, Sogdian traders dominated overland commerce between China and Persia, establishing merchant colonies in cities as far apart as Chang'an in the east and the edges of the Byzantine world in the west. Sogdian was, for centuries, effectively the common commercial language of the entire trade network, used in contracts and correspondence even among merchants who were not themselves Sogdian by birth. Sogdian families often placed sons in trading colonies thousands of miles from home for years at a time, maintaining contact through letters and periodic visits rather than constant supervision. This extraordinary network of far-flung, mutually trusting family outposts allowed Sogdian merchants to coordinate trade across distances that would have overwhelmed a less organized commercial culture. This is what makes it so remarkable. An entire civilization's economic influence rested not on conquest or empire, but on the patient, generational cultivation of trust across an enormous, invisible network of family ties. A remarkable set of documents, now known as the ancient letters, survived buried near a watchtower outside Dunhuang for over 1,000 years, offering an extraordinarily intimate glimpse into Sogdian merchant life. Written in the early 4th century, these letters include one from a Sogdian woman abandoned by her merchant husband in a distant city, complaining bitterly about her circumstances, alongside more routine correspondence discussing shipments, debts, and business arrangements. Far from grand political history, these letters reveal the genuinely personal cost that long-distance trade could impose on families left waiting, sometimes for years, without word from a husband, son, or father far from home.
They also confirm, in vivid practical detail, just how organized Sogdian commercial networks already were by this early period, with specific references to established trading posts and expected patterns of correspondence. This is a quiet reminder that behind every grand narrative of trade and empire lies an enormous, mostly unrecorded weight of ordinary human waiting, worry, and hope.
Even a merchant's fortune, it seems, was often built on the patient, uncertain loneliness of the families left behind. Far to the west, another remarkable trading network developed among Jewish merchants, known to later historians as the Radhanites, whose trade routes stretched from Western Europe through the Islamic world and, by some accounts, as far as China itself. Operating largely during the early medieval period, Radhanite merchants took advantage of their position as a religious minority welcomed, cautiously, by both Christian and Muslim rulers who valued the trade connections they brought without necessarily trusting them politically. This unusual position allowed Radhanite traders to move goods and information across political and religious boundaries that were often closed to merchants more closely tied to a single ruling power. Multilingual by necessity, Radhanite merchants often spoke Arabic, Persian, and various European languages, giving them a crucial advantage in negotiating across a fractured and suspicious medieval world. Their success, much like that of the Sogdians centuries earlier, depended heavily on maintaining a reputation for reliability that transcended any single kingdom's borders. Time and again throughout this history, the merchants who thrived were rarely the wealthiest or most powerful, but simply the ones trusted enough to move freely where others could not. Armenian merchants, too, built an extraordinarily durable trading network that stretched from the Mediterranean deep into Persia, India, and eventually as far as Russia and Southeast Asia. Operating largely from the city of New Julfa near Isfahan from the 17th century onward, Armenian merchant families developed sophisticated accounting practices and standardized commercial contracts that allowed family members scattered across multiple continents to coordinate complex trading ventures with remarkable precision. Letters between Armenian merchants in different cities often included detailed price information, exchange rates, and shipping conditions, functioning almost like an early, informal trade newsletter passed hand to hand across enormous distances.
This careful record-keeping allowed Armenian trading families to make informed decisions about where to send goods, months or even years before a shipment might actually arrive at its final destination. Much like the Sogdians before them, Armenian merchants relied on an extended family and community network rather than any single government, giving their trade a resilience that outlasted the rise and fall of numerous surrounding empires.
Across centuries and continents, it seems the same lesson kept repeating itself. Family, patience, and careful correspondence could build an economic network stronger than many kingdoms. Imagine a young Sogdian merchant, no older than 16, saying goodbye to his family in Samarkand, knowing he might not return for 5 or even 10 years. Sent instead to manage his family's trading post in a distant Chinese city. This practice of sending sons abroad for extended commercial apprenticeships was common among the great trading families of the Silk Road, treating years of separation as a necessary investment in the family's long-term economic future. Young merchants sent this way learned local languages, built relationships with local officials, and gradually earned enough trust to conduct increasingly significant business on the family's behalf. Success in this system depended enormously on a young merchant's discipline and patience, since impulsive decisions made far from home, with no immediate family oversight, could permanently damage a family's reputation across an entire region. Many such merchants never saw their parents again before they passed away, communicating instead through letters that might take a year or more to arrive.
It is worth remembering, quietly, just how much personal sacrifice was folded invisibly into every bolt of silk and every sack of spice that eventually reached a distant marketplace. Risk-sharing partnerships among these merchant networks took forms remarkably sophisticated for their era, often dividing a single caravan's cargo among multiple independent investors, specifically to limit any one person's exposure to catastrophic loss.
A wealthy merchant might invest in small portions of several different caravans heading in different directions, rather than committing his entire fortune to a single journey that could be wiped out by bandits, disease, or a collapsed bridge over a mountain river. This diversification strategy, remarkably similar in principle to modern investment portfolios, allowed merchant families to survive individual disasters that would otherwise have ended their trading careers entirely.
Written agreements, where they existed, carefully specified each investor's share of both profit and loss, anticipating disputes before they arose rather than relying purely on goodwill after the fact. Even without modern insurance markets or financial instruments, merchants along these routes had already discovered, through hard experience, the basic wisdom of not placing all of one's fortune into a single, vulnerable venture. This is a quiet thread worth following forward. The instinct to spread risk across many small ventures is far older than any modern financial institution that formalized it. Translators and interpreters formed an entire, often overlooked profession essential to the Silk Road's economic function, since no single merchant could realistically master every language spoken along a multi-thousand-mile route. Skilled interpreters, often multilingual from childhood due to growing up in border regions or diverse trading cities, commanded significant fees for their services, particularly when negotiating high-value transactions where a single misunderstood term could cost a fortune. Some interpreters became trusted long-term advisors to particular merchant families, traveling with them repeatedly and gradually learning the specific commercial vocabulary and preferences of their regular clients.
Disputes over mistranslation were a genuine and recurring hazard of Silk Road commerce, occasionally souring what might otherwise have been a profitable and lasting trade relationship between two parties who simply could not fully understand each other's words. This reliance on skilled human interpretation, rather than any standardized shared language, meant that trust in a good interpreter was, in its own quiet way, just as economically vital as trust in a good money changer.
Even communication itself in this world was a scarce resource, carefully guarded and highly valued. By the time these merchant networks reached their medieval peak, an unspoken but widely understood code of conduct had emerged across the entire Silk Road, allowing traders of wildly different backgrounds to cooperate with reasonable confidence. This code was never written into a single formal law, yet it governed everything, from how disputes should be raised, to how debts should be honored across long absences, to how a stranger merchant ought to be welcomed into an unfamiliar caravanserai for the night. Merchants who violated this unspoken code, whether through theft, fraud, or simple dishonesty, risked a kind of informal exile from the network altogether, since word of such behavior traveled along the same routes as the goods themselves.
This self-enforcing system of reputation was, in many ways, more effective than any formal court could have been across such enormous distances, since it required no central authority at all to function, only the shared understanding that dishonesty would eventually be discovered and remembered. This is what makes it so quietly remarkable. Across a network spanning multiple empires, languages, and faiths, honesty was enforced not by law, but simply by the patient, collective memory of the road itself.
The overland Silk Road did not vanish suddenly. It faded slowly, the way a well-worn path fades once a faster one appears nearby. By the late 15th century, European sailors had begun charting ocean routes around Africa toward Asia, offering a way to reach the same goods without crossing a single mile of contested overland territory. A ship, though slower in some respects, could carry far more cargo than any camel caravan and required no tolls paid to a dozen separate rulers along the way. Sometimes an old road is not defeated by any single rival. It is simply outcompeted, quietly, by a better one. The fall of Constantinople to Ottoman forces in 1453 reshaped trade politics across the entire eastern Mediterranean. European merchants who had long relied on Constantinople as a gateway for eastern goods now faced new tolls, restrictions, and uncertain relations with the city's new rulers, pushing them harder to search for alternative routes entirely. Necessity, once again, proved to be one of history's most reliable inventors. A single political shift in one city helped nudge an entire continent toward the wider ocean. Portuguese explorers rounding the southern tip of Africa opened a maritime path directly to Indian spice markets, bypassing overland middlemen almost entirely. Where once a shipment of pepper might pass through a dozen hands and a dozen tolls before reaching Europe, a single Portuguese ship could now sail directly to its source and return with cargo at a fraction of the old accumulated cost. Merchant families who had built fortunes on overland trade watched their advantage erode within a single generation. No advantage in trade, however old and however well earned, has ever proven entirely permanent. Imagine a Venetian merchant family in the early 16th century, still trading pepper through familiar overland partners, hearing new reports of Portuguese ships returning laden with spice bought directly at the source. At first, the news seems distant and unlikely to matter much to their own established trade. Within a few short decades, however, prices shift, old partnerships weaken, and the routes their grandfathers had trusted absolutely no longer carry the same certain profit. Every great trading network, however ancient, eventually meets a newer path it cannot quite outcompete. Central Asian cities that had thrived for centuries on overland trade slowly saw their relative importance shrink as maritime routes captured a growing share of long-distance commerce. Samarkand and Bukhara did not disappear, but their centrality to global trade diminished as the world's main commercial currents shifted steadily toward the sea. Populations remained, traditions endured, yet the extraordinary wealth once guaranteed simply by geography no longer flowed through quite so reliably. Even a city built entirely on being in the right place can, slowly, find the world's roads rearranging themselves elsewhere. Ottoman control over key overland junctions added new costs and complications for European merchants still using traditional routes. Tariffs, restrictions, and shifting political relationships made overland trade increasingly unpredictable compared to the more direct, single-authority simplicity of a long ocean voyage. Merchants, ever practical, gradually redirected their capital and attention toward the routes offering the steadiest returns. Loyalty to an old road, however storied, rarely survives for long once a more reliable alternative quietly proves itself. Not every overland connection disappeared, and regional trade along shorter Central Asian routes continued for centuries afterward, even as the grand transcontinental trade diminished. Local caravans still carried goods between neighboring regions, and some specialty items, difficult to transport safely by sea, continued moving overland long after the great long-distance trade had shifted elsewhere. Decline, in this story, was never total. It was simply a narrowing, a road once vast, now serving smaller, more local purposes. Even after its grandest age has passed, a road rarely falls entirely silent. This is what makes the slow fading of the overland Silk Road so quietly poignant. No single event ended it, and no single villain can be blamed for its decline. Politics, geography, and the simple, patient logic of a cheaper alternative all worked together over the span of a full century to redirect the world's attention toward the sea. The road did not fail. It was simply, gradually, outgrown by the very world it had helped create. Perhaps this is the quiet fate awaiting even the greatest trade networks, not destruction, but a slow, graceful handing over of the torch. Most people living along the Silk Road were never grand merchants at all, but farmers, herders, and craftspeople supplying the trade quietly from its edges. A farmer growing mulberry leaves to feed silkworms, or a shepherd raising wool destined for distant looms, rarely traveled the road themselves, yet their labor formed its true foundation. The romance of caravans in cities often overshadows these quieter, essential lives lived just outside the spotlight. Every grand trading empire, in the end, rests on the steady, unglamorous work of people who never once set foot on the famous road it built. Women played essential, if often under-recorded, roles in Silk Road economies, managing households, workshops, and sometimes trade itself in a merchant's absence. While long-distance caravan travel was often, though not exclusively, undertaken by men, women frequently managed family businesses, wove the very textiles being traded, and made critical decisions during the long months a husband or son might be away. Historical records favor the traveling merchant's story, yet the household left behind was rarely simply waiting passively for his return. Behind almost every famous caravan lay an equally important, far quieter economy, sustained at home. Artisans specializing in dyeing, weaving, and metalwork clustered in particular neighborhoods within trading cities, passing skills carefully from one generation to the next. A family known for a particular shade of blue dye or a specific style of metal inlay might guard its techniques as closely as any merchant guarded a trade secret. Skill, much like reputation, became a form of inherited wealth passed down quietly through careful apprenticeship rather than any written contract. Some of the finest goods carried across this road were never invented by the merchant who sold them, but by a craftsperson whose name history rarely bothered to record. Imagine a small workshop tucked behind a busy market street, a weaver's hands moving steadily across a loom while a child watches closely, learning patterns that will take years to fully master. Outside, merchants haggle loudly over finished goods, entirely unaware of the quiet, patient labor that made each thread possible. The child will grow older, the merchant will grow richer, and neither fully sees how tightly their two very different lives are woven together. Trade, however grand its reputation, has always depended on rooms this small and this quiet. Everyday food along the Silk Road blended influences from every culture the route touched, creating dishes still recognizable in some form today. Noodles, dumplings, flatbreads, and spiced stews traveled and transformed as they moved, absorbing local ingredients and techniques at every stop along the way. A traveler's stomach, it turns out, adapts to distance just as readily as their purse does. Perhaps nowhere is cultural exchange easier to taste, quite literally, than in the humble, shared history of bread and noodles. Marketplaces themselves followed regular rhythms, with certain days set aside for livestock, others for textiles, and others for grain and produce. Local rulers or guilds often regulated these schedules carefully, ensuring fair access and preventing any single group of merchants from monopolizing the busiest trading days. Even in antiquity, a functioning market required careful, patient management rather than pure, unregulated chaos. Order, more often than not, has quietly underpinned even history's most colorful and bustling scenes. Children born into merchant families often began learning the family trade astonishingly early, accompanying fathers or uncles on shorter regional journeys before ever attempting a longer crossing. A boy might learn to judge silk quality by touch, or estimate a camel's remaining strength by its gait, long before he ever negotiated a single independent sale. Expertise on this road was rarely taught from any book. It was absorbed slowly, mile by mile, alongside someone older and more patient. Some of history's most valuable knowledge was never written down at all, only walked, quietly, from one generation into the next. This is what makes the everyday life of the Silk Road so quietly affecting. Behind every famous city and every recorded fortune stood countless ordinary people whose names were never written into any history at all. Farmers, weavers, mothers, and children sustained this enormous network through nothing more dramatic than steady, patient, daily labor. The road remembered in songs and legends was always, first and always, built from lives far smaller and far quieter than the legend suggests. Perhaps every great economic story in history is, underneath its grandest chapters, simply a story about ordinary people showing up, faithfully, day after day. Overland caravans were never the only path connecting east and west. A second, quieter route ran across open water, carried by monsoon winds rather than camels. From ports along India's coast to the harbors of Arabia and East Africa, sailors learned to time entire voyages around seasonal wind reversals, sailing east on one wind and returning west on its opposite months later. Ships could carry far heavier cargo than any caravan, making bulk goods like pepper, porcelain, and timber genuinely profitable to move by sea. Yet a single miscalculated monsoon season could strand a ship and its investors for half a year longer than planned. This is why the maritime and overland routes never fully replaced one another. Each simply suited a different kind of risk and a different kind of patient merchant. Chinese ports like Guangzhou and later Quanzhou grew immensely wealthy as maritime trade expanded, drawing Arab, Persian, and Southeast Asian merchants into permanent foreign quarters within Chinese cities. Quanzhou, in particular, became so cosmopolitan by the Song and Yuan periods that travelers described its harbor as one of the busiest in the entire world, crowded with ships from dozens of distant ports. Local officials taxed this foreign trade heavily, and that tax revenue alone was enough to fund significant portions of regional government. Foreign merchant communities, granted their own quarters and often their own legal customs, lived for generations in these port cities without ever fully assimilating, forming permanent bridges between distant economies. Even a single busy harbor, it turns out, could function almost like its own small, self-contained international economy. Arab dhows, with their distinctive triangular sails, dominated much of the Indian Ocean trade for centuries, connecting the Persian Gulf to India, Southeast Asia, and the East African coast in a network every bit as vital as the overland Silk Road. Swahili coast cities like Kilwa and Mombasa grew wealthy trading gold, ivory, and enslaved people alongside spices and cloth. A grim reminder that not every good carried along these routes was one that history should celebrate without reservation. The trade in enslaved human beings, present in various forms across many stretches of these networks, caused real and lasting suffering that no amount of economic sophistication elsewhere can excuse or soften. It sits uncomfortably alongside the era's genuine achievements in commerce and culture, and it deserves to be remembered honestly rather than quietly skipped past. Even the most remarkable trading civilizations, it turns out, were capable of profiting from practices we now rightly recognize as deeply wrong. Spices, more than silk itself, eventually became the maritime route's single most profitable cargo, with pepper, cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg fetching extraordinary prices once they reached distant Western markets. A single shipload of spices from the Indonesian archipelago, purchased for a modest sum at its point of origin, could sell in a Mediterranean port for many times its original cost, a markup steep enough to justify the very real dangers of the voyage. This enormous profit margin drew merchants from across the known world toward the same handful of remote spice-producing islands, creating fierce, sometimes violent competition over access to these small but extraordinarily valuable growing regions.
Control over a single spice-producing island could, in the right circumstances, generate more wealth than control over an entire ordinary province of farmland. This is a quiet reminder of how unevenly value could be distributed across geography. Sometimes an entire region's fortune rested on nothing more than which crop happened to grow well in its particular soil. Imagine a harbor at dawn in Quanzhou. Hundreds of ships rocking gently at anchor. Sailors from Arabia, Persia, India, and Southeast Asia, all shouting across gangplanks in half a dozen different languages, while dock workers haul sacks of pepper and bolts of silk in opposite directions.
This single image captures something the overland caravans rarely could: sheer density, an entire world compressed into one crowded, noisy waterfront. harbor officials developed detailed customs procedures, inspecting cargo, collecting tariffs, and recording each ship's origin with a bureaucratic precision that would feel familiar to any modern customs officer. Over time, these maritime hubs grew so central to regional economies that losing access to even one major port could measurably weaken an entire empire's treasury. It is worth remembering, quietly, that some of history's grandest economic centers were never inland capitals at all, but simply the busiest stretch of a single working harbor. By the later medieval period, the maritime route had grown so profitable that it began to quietly overshadow its older overland counterpart, shifting the center of gravity in global trade toward coastal empires rather than inland caravan cities. Chinese naval expeditions under the Ming Dynasty, most famously those led by the Admiral Zheng He, briefly projected extraordinary maritime power across the Indian Ocean, visiting ports as far away as East Africa before China's rulers chose, for their own internal reasons, to withdraw from large-scale ocean voyaging. Had that withdrawal not occurred, the balance of global trade in the following centuries might have looked entirely different than the one history eventually produced. Even the grandest trading network, it seems, can shift course entirely based on a single ruler's change of heart. This quiet withdrawal left an opening that other seafaring powers would, in time, step forward to fill. Genghis Khan's conquests reshaped the trade routes more thoroughly than any single event in Silk Road history, and for a brief golden window, an entire continent effectively fell under one set of rules.
The unification of so much territory under Mongol rule, however violently achieved, meant a merchant could travel from the Black Sea to the Pacific under a single system of law, taxation, and protection, something never before possible across such a distance.
The human cost of these conquests was immense. Entire cities destroyed and populations displaced, and no account of the era's later prosperity should pretend otherwise.
Yet once conquest gave way to administration, the resulting era, later called the Pax Mongolica, opened trade routes wider and safer than they had been in centuries. This is a difficult truth worth sitting with quietly. The same empire responsible for devastating violence also built, almost by accident, one of history's great eras of open trade. Mongol rulers issued small metal or wooden tablets called paisa, functioning much like a modern diplomatic passport, granting the bearer safe passage, fresh horses, and lodging at official relay stations across the entire empire.
A merchant carrying proper documentation or traveling under Mongol protection could move goods across thousands of miles with dramatically reduced fear of banditry, since Mongol administrators enforced order along the roads with genuine severity. Alongside this system, an extensive network of relay stations, called YAM, allowed messages and officials to move at extraordinary speed, sometimes covering in days distances that once took months. Tolls, once collected by dozens of independent local rulers along a single route, were consolidated under unified Mongol administration, reducing the layered cost that had long weighed down overland trade. Even a conquering empire, it turns out, could accidentally become one of history's great facilitators of commerce, simply by imposing order where chaos had once ruled. It was during this same Mongol-era window of relative safety that a young Venetian merchant named Marco Polo traveled east with his father and uncle, eventually spending years at the court of the Mongol Emperor Kublai Khan. Whatever the exact accuracy of every detail in his later account, Polo's descriptions of paper money, coal burned as fuel, and enormous, well-organized cities astonished European readers who had never imagined such things existed.
His book, dictated to a fellow prisoner years later, became one of Europe's most influential windows into the Eastern economy, inspiring generations of merchants and explorers who followed after him. Historians still debate how much of his account was first-hand experience and how much was second-hand report dressed up as memory.
Even an imperfect account, it seems, can still change the course of history simply by making a distant, unfamiliar economy feel suddenly real to those who read about it. This same golden era of open trade, however, carried within it an invisible passenger far more consequential than any merchant or monk, a bacterium that would soon devastate populations across 3 continents. The very roads and caravans that had made trade so efficient under Mongol rule also carried the plague westward from Central Asia, reaching Crimean ports before spreading by ship into the Mediterranean world during the 14th century. The resulting pandemic, later called the Black Death, killed a significant portion of Europe's population within just a few years, an almost unimaginable scale of loss that reshaped labor markets, land ownership, and entire social structures across the continent. Trade routes themselves suffered enormously in the immediate aftermath, as depopulated regions struggled to maintain the caravans, ports, and marketplaces that commerce depended upon. It stands as one of history's starkest reminders that the same networks connecting distant peoples in prosperity could, just as easily, connect them in tragedy. In the plague's aftermath, labor across much of Europe and parts of Asia became suddenly, tragically scarce, and this scarcity, however grim its origin, quietly shifted economic power toward ordinary workers who survived. Wages for laborers rose in many regions simply because fewer people remained to do the same amount of necessary work, a shift some historians consider one of the earliest large-scale examples of a labor market responding directly to sudden population change. Trade along the old routes gradually recovered over subsequent decades, though the network never fully returned to its earlier Mongol-era efficiency, as the empire that had once unified it began fracturing into smaller, competing successor states. This slow fragmentation meant tolls and local rulers once again multiplied along the route, quietly raising the cost of overland trade just as Europe's appetite for Eastern goods continued to grow. Even tragedy, it seems, left behind unexpected economic aftershocks that reshaped daily life long after the immediate grief had passed. As the Ottoman Empire expanded across much of the traditional overland route by the 15th century, it gained near total control over the choke points connecting Europe to Asian goods, and it taxed that position accordingly. Merchants moving spices, silk, and other Eastern luxuries toward European markets now faced layered Ottoman tariffs at nearly every crossing, driving prices upward and squeezing profit margins that had once made the overland journey worthwhile. European merchants and monarchs, increasingly frustrated by these rising costs, began searching in earnest for an alternative path to the riches of Asia that did not require passing through Ottoman-controlled territory at all.
This single economic pressure, more than any grand romantic notion of exploration, quietly financed the earliest European ocean voyages seeking a sea route around Africa toward India. This is what makes it so remarkable. The great age of exploration was born less from curiosity than from merchants simply looking for a way around an expensive toll booth. When Portuguese ships finally rounded the southern tip of Africa and reached India by sea, they accomplished something the old overland Silk Road had structurally never allowed, bypassing every single middleman between the spice's origin and the final European buyer.
This new maritime route dramatically undercut the layered markups of the old land-based network, allowing European traders to import spices at a fraction of their previous cost, and in turn drawing much of the world's spice trade away from its traditional overland and Arab-controlled maritime paths. Cities that had grown wealthy for centuries purely from their position along these older routes, including several great Silk Road hubs, saw their economic importance slowly fade as trade increasingly flowed around them rather than through them. This shift did not happen overnight, unfolding instead across more than a century of gradual change. Even the mightiest trading cities, it seems, were never fully safe from a new route quietly opening somewhere else on the map. Yet the old overland Silk Road never entirely vanished. Caravan trade persisted in reduced form for centuries afterward, carrying regional goods even as its role in grand international commerce diminished. Central Asian cities adjusted, leaning more heavily on regional trade, agriculture, and their enduring reputations as centers of scholarship and craft rather than their former dominance over global exchange. In many ways, the story of the Silk Road's decline mirrors its rise, gradual, uneven, and shaped by countless small decisions rather than any single dramatic collapse. What faded was not trade itself, but a particular pattern of dominance, one route giving way slowly to another as the wider world's economic geography quietly rearranged itself. Even now, this pattern repeats in every economy. No single route, city, or advantage lasts forever, no matter how dominant it once seemed. Modern highways, railways, and pipelines now trace portions of ground once crossed only by camel and cart, echoes of the very same geography that shaped trade 2,000 years ago. Some of today's largest infrastructure projects across Central Asia and beyond have been described, informally, as a new Silk Road, moving containers and cargo along corridors first worn smooth by ancient caravans. The names change, the vehicles change, yet the underlying logic remains oddly familiar. Goods still move most easily along the paths that history has already proven workable. Geography, it seems, forgets nothing, even when empires rise and fall on top of it. The word Silk Road itself has outgrown its origin, now used loosely to describe almost any long chain of exchange linking distant peoples together. Digital networks carrying information across oceans, container ships circling the globe, and even quiet financial transfers between banks that have never met are sometimes described using this same old, borrowed metaphor. Perhaps this borrowing endures because the underlying pattern truly has never changed. Strangers, separated by distance, finding a way to trust one another just enough to trade. Every century seems to build its own version of the same old road, wearing a different name. Imagine, for a moment, a modern shipping container gliding across the very ocean routes once sailed by Arab dhows and Chinese junks, its contents tracked by satellite rather than by a merchant's careful memory. Somewhere beneath the surface of that efficiency lies the same old story: risk taken on faith, value moved across distance, strangers relying on one another to keep a very old promise. The tools have changed almost beyond recognition, yet the quiet human agreement underneath them has barely changed at all. Perhaps this is the oldest lesson trade has ever taught us: that distance was never truly the obstacle. Trust always was. This is what makes the legacy of the Silk Road so quietly enduring. It never really ended, so much as it dissolved slowly into the ordinary infrastructure of the modern world, invisible precisely because it succeeded so completely. Every parcel that crosses an ocean tonight, every payment that clears between banks in two different countries, rests on the same patient inheritance, first built by merchants, money changers, and caravan guides who never once imagined how far their small, careful habits of trust would eventually travel. Empires rose and fell along this road, cities flourished and faded, and yet the simple human agreement to trade fairly across distance somehow always survived. Perhaps that quiet endurance, more than any single fortune made or lost, is the truest treasure this ancient road ever carried. Long after the overland route's peak, the financial ideas it had nurtured continued traveling quietly westward, planting themselves in soil far from their origin. Arabic numerals, adopted from Indian mathematics and carried through Islamic scholarship along these very trade networks, eventually replaced clumsy Roman numeral bookkeeping across Europe, making complex commercial calculation dramatically easier for merchants everywhere. Double-entry bookkeeping, refined in Italian trading cities during the medieval period, echoed accounting principles that Silk Road merchants had practiced informally for centuries, tracking debt, credit, and shared risk across long absences. None of these innovations arrived in Europe overnight. Each traveled slowly through generations of merchants, scholars, and translators who rarely receive individual credit in the story. This is what makes it so quietly remarkable. Some of modern finance's most basic tools were shaped, indirectly, by centuries of trial and error along roads most of us will never walk. Imagine a marketplace at midday in any great Silk Road city, the air thick with the smell of spice and dust. A buyer and seller locked in the unhurried ritual of bargaining that could stretch across an entire afternoon. This slow, patient haggling was never mere theater. It was a genuine negotiation over information neither party fully possessed, each side testing the other's knowledge of true prices elsewhere along the route. Skilled bargainers were valued almost as highly as skilled weighers or translators, since a poorly negotiated price could quietly erase an entire season's expected profit. Ordinary market life like this, rarely recorded by chroniclers obsessed with kings and conquests, made up the true daily fabric of the Silk Road economy far more than any single legendary caravan ever did. It is worth remembering, quietly, that history's grandest trade network was built, day after day, from exactly this kind of unremarkable, patient conversation. Even now, centuries after camels last carried silk across these deserts, the routes themselves have never entirely lost their economic significance, echoing faintly in modern infrastructure projects that follow strikingly similar paths across the same ancient landscape. Railways, pipelines, and highways today frequently trace the same practical logic that guided caravan routes 1,000 years earlier, following the same mountain passes and river valleys because geography itself has not changed, whatever era happens to be crossing it. This is not a story that ever truly ended, so much as one that keeps quietly reshaping itself, generation after generation, along the same patient lines the land has always offered. The lesson beneath all of it remains remarkably steady across every century we have wandered through tonight. Trust, patience, and the slow accumulation of reputation have always mattered more than any single shipment of silk, silver, or spice. And on that quiet, steady note, let your thoughts settle here for a while, drifting gently over deserts and harbors that have seen more patient human history than almost anywhere else on Earth. Tonight we followed a single quiet thread all the way across the ancient world, from a diplomat's failed errand to a caravan resting beneath desert stars. We walked through cities that grew wealthy simply by standing in the right place, watched silk become a kind of money, and coin become a kind of trust. We sat beside money changers weighing silver in shaded courtyards, and beside families waiting anxiously for a caravan that was already many days overdue. We remembered, too, the harder chapters, The plague that traveled these same roads, the wars that closed them, the suffering that shadowed some of history's proudest fortunes. Because a story told honestly must hold both its light and its weight together. And slowly, gently, we watched this ancient road dissolve into the quiet infrastructure of our own modern world, still carrying, underneath everything, that same old, patient promise between strangers. If you are still awake, there is another story waiting for you whenever you would like to hear it, resting quietly on this channel until you return. If tonight's journey helped you drift a little closer to sleep, consider leaving a like or a gentle word in the comments below. It helps this small channel more than you might realize, and it costs you nothing at all. For now, let your shoulders settle fully into whatever is holding you. Unclench your jaw. Let your breathing slow, long and even, like a caravan's steady pace across an endless, gentle horizon. Let the last of your thoughts fade quietly, like lamplight dimming in a caravanserai at the end of a very long day. Sleep well and good night. And so our river of trade, the one we followed tonight from a failed diplomatic errand to a caterpillar's quiet labor, from desert wells to crowded harbors, slowly comes to rest. We watched silk become a kind of money, watched money changers and monasteries become the ancient world's first bankers, watched Sogdian families build trust across 1,000 miles of empty desert, and watched a golden era of Mongol peace carry both prosperity and tragedy along the very same roads. We sat in caravanserai courtyards after sunset, listened to merchants haggle patiently over spices and silver, and followed the slow, uneven shift of the world's wealth from overland caravan to open ocean. Through every century of it, the same quiet truths kept surfacing again and again, that trust is harder to build than any fortune, and far easier to lose. That geography quietly decides more of history than we like to admit, and that behind every grand trade route lies countless small, unrecorded lives who made it possible. If you are still awake, there is another quiet story waiting for you on this channel whenever you are ready for it, tracing some other slow thread through the history of money and trust. If tonight's journey helped you drift a little closer to sleep, a gentle like or a quiet comment always helps this channel find its way to someone else who needs the same rest. For now, let your jaw unclench, let your shoulders sink a little further into stillness, and let your breathing settle into something slow and unhurried, like a caravan finally reaching its resting place after a long day's travel. Let the light around you dim, let the night settle in quietly, and let your thoughts drift off, the way sand settles once the wind has finally stopped. Sleep well and good night.